Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Mrinmoy Pramanik. I teach comparative Indian language and literature at the University of Calcutta. Now we'll discuss Translator's Invisibility. This module is written by Shashwati Saha, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Sikkim University. Translators are perceived as invisible agents. They are not meant to be seen. They are expected to enter into the skin of the author and deliver exactly what the original text contains. They exist, yet they do not exist. Although the translators make most of the world's literature accessible to mankind, their names are tucked somewhere inside the first few pages of the book. They are not supposed to be present on the front pages, since the objective of the publisher is to present such a transparent version of the source text to the target readers that it does not seem translation at all. This is how the publisher pretends to provide his readers with the authenticate source text, as if they are reading the original. Thus, this politics of rendering the translator invisible has for long been overshadowing and undervaluing the task of the translator and his creative self. Rendering the translator invisible leads to two problems: lack of appreciation and lack of professional recognition. This attitude towards the translators leads to the belief that the translator's job is to be invisible and neutral, not to distort the original text by imposing their own personality on it. The recurring metaphor that has been used to define translation is that of a window or a pane of glass. Lawrence Venuti starts his much recognized work, The Translator's Invisibility, with a quote from Norman Shapiro, where he says, "A good translation is like a pane of glass. You only notice that it is there when there are little imperfection, scratches, bubbles. Ideally, there should not be any. It should never call attention to itself. Thus, to get proper access to the original text, the eye should not rest the window pane, but look through it. The stains or bubbles on the window pane are the reflections of the translator's subjectivity, which might intervene the reader's imagination and compel them to focus on the stains instead of looking through it. If at any point the reader suspects that the book they are reading is a translated work, then there must be something wrong with the translation." The basic categories of errors that can be considered specks on the window pane are equivalence, not the same meaning; form, ungrammatical structure; style, not the same style as the original; clumsy, unnatural style, even reads like a translation; the ultimate criticism, reading translated text, which is does not have the same effect as the original did on the original readers. So such problems are involved there in reading translated text, and because of these problems, a text appeared as very much translated, not an authentic original text. As a result, the translators become more conscious about the quality of their translated work and how well it fits into the existing literary conventions of the target culture. Therefore, they use standardized language more used in the target culture and attempt to produce more natural translations. The translator has to mediate between the author on the one hand and the readers on the other. She or he not only carries a text from one language culture to another, but also explains the text to the target readers. In certain cases, the translator has to be explicit in order to help the readers understand the text. But in order to do so, she or he has to understand the source text, and it is their own understanding that they pass on to the readers. But the reading and understanding on the part of the translator is completely disregarded when the translator is made invisible. The translator's job is regarded as a mechanical transferring of text from one language into another that requires no creativity as such. Now, let us talk something about why the translator is rendered invisible. This is kind of very interesting and mysterious question to the readers and researchers of translation studies. Lawrence Venuti, in his book The Translator's Invisibility, talks about what he calls the fluency ideal. In order to make the translated text more fluently readable to the readers, the translator is conveniently rendered invisible. As Venuti puts it, the more fluent the translation, the more invisible the translator, and presumably the more visible the writer or meaning of the foreign text. But in this case, the readers are deceived into thinking that the text is in fact original and not translation. This fluent translation strategy, as Chesterman and Wagner points out, denies the translators the right to be visible, and it also denies the source culture, the other, the right to appear as something different. A translated text is judged acceptable by a publisher only when it is a good translation. A good translation is one in which the modern vocabulary of the target language readers have been used. It follows the syntactical pattern of the target language culture and therefore makes the foreign thoughts available to the readers in a more familiar, domesticated way. The translated text seems natural or not translated. The advancement of scientific research also demands transparent translation from one language to another. The advertising industry, which aims at selling their products, also demands accurate and clear translations, rendering the translator invisible. Now, let us talk about how a translator is rendered invisible. Why translator is rendered invisible? We talked about it, and now how a translator is rendered invisible. There are a few ways. The process of domestication renders the translator invisible. In order to be fluent, the domesticated translations tend to downplay the distinctive features of the foreign text. The translator cannot be true to the idiosyncrasies of the foreign author because they may appear too foreign to the readers and can become stumbling blocks in the course of their reading. Lawrence Venuti quotes the British translator J.M. Cohen, who states that 20th century translators, influenced by science teaching and the growing importance attached to accuracy, have generally concentrated on prose meaning and interpretation and neglected the imitation of form and manner. Venuti notes that Cohen is actually hinting at the dangers of domestication that reduces individual author style and national tricks of speech to plain prose uniformity. This process of domestication is so effective that it renders the translator invisible. The second is the invisibility of the translator is determined by the individualistic conception of authorship. According to this concept, thoughts and ideas expressed by the author in the text are original, unmediated by trans-individual determinants, linguistic, cultural, social, that might complicate authorial originality. But this entails a disadvantageous position for the translator, who is therefore given a secondary position. Venuti writes, on the one hand, translation is defined as a second-order representation. Only the foreign text can be original and authenticate copy, true to the author's personality or intention. Whereas the translation is derivative, fake, potentially a false copy. On the other hand, translation is required to effect its second-order status, with transparent discourse producing the illusion of authorial presence, whereby the translated text can be taken as the original. This is the reason why most of the translators are concerned about fidelity in translation, and translation theorists have judged a translation on the basis of its faithfulness to the source text. The most important quality that a translator should possess is the quality to identify herself or himself with the author, but is always subservient to the author. Venuti quotes Willard Trusk, major 20th century translator, who drew a clear distinction between authoring and translating. Trusk says, when you are writing a novel, what you are essentially doing is expressing yourself, whereas when you translate, you are not expressing yourself. You are performing a technical stunt. I realized that the translator and the actor had to have the same kind of talent. What they both do is to take something of somebody else's and put it over as if it were their own. According to Venuti, the translator's invisibility is a weird self-annihilation. The politics of providing the author the sole authority over the source text deprives the translator of any right over the text he translates, and thereby renders him invisible. However, in classical Indian concept of anuvad, such strict concept of adhering to the source text or being faithful to it never existed. There was no concept of the original. The source text acted just as a source to another text, which retold the story freely, incorporating new plots and ideas. The credit and creativity of the author lies in the fact that how well he can render the original and the degree of perfection thus achieved. That is the reason why there are multiple Ramayanas and Mahabharatas, and none of them are considered translated works. The third point is the unfavorable legal status renders the translator invisible. The secondary status of the translator is reflected also in the legal status of a translator vis-a-vis a text, both in copyright law and in actual contractual arrangements. Venuti points out that British and American law defines translation as an adaptation or derivative work based on an original work of authorship. Thus, the copyright, including the right to prepare derivative work or adaptations, is vested in the author. Thus, it is the author and not the translator who controls the publication of the translation during the term of copyright. But as Venuti mentions, since authorship here is defined as the creation of a form of medium of expression, not an idea, as originality of language, not thought, British and American law permits translations to be copyrighted in the translator's name, recognizing that the translator uses another language for the foreign text and therefore can be understood as creating an original work. In copyright law, the translator is and is not an author. Although a copyright is given to the translator, but the control over the translation rests with the author. The translator's authorship never gets full legal recognition because of the priority given to the authors. The Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works gives the authors authority over the translation in United Kingdom and America, even if they are foreign nationals. The legal protection that the author enjoys is nothing when compared to the copyright given to the translators. The Berne Commission, Vanity rightly points out, at once assigns an authorial right to the translator and withdraws it. I quote, translations, adaptations, arrangements of music and other alterations of a literary or artistic work shall be protected as original works without prejudice to the copyright in the original work held by the foreign author, who shall enjoy the exclusive right of making and of authorizing the translations. I unquote. The copyright law, therefore, does not guarantee a position or legal right to the translator comparable to the author, thus paving the way for further invisibility. Now, next point is the translator's invisibility and publication. The general perception about a translator also gets reflected in the contracts that are signed between them and the publishing houses. Besides the copyright law, the other factors that impact the translation contracts are the changing book markets, a particular translator's level of expertise, and the difficulty of a particular translation project. Many publishing houses demand the exclusive copyright over the translated text. These publishers have never regarded the translated work as an original work of authorship, but work made for hire, a category in American copyright law whereby, as Vanity mentions, the employer or person for whom the work was prepared is considered the author, and unless the parties have expressly agreed otherwise in a written instrument signed by them, owns all the rights comprised in the copyright. Such an attitude towards the translator also affects the payment made to them. The translators are either paid a flat fee per 1,000 words or per page, which comprises of 500-600 words. Once the payment is made, the translator has get no right over the commercial success of the book. Even if the book does very well in the market and goes for repeated editions, translator will get no money for it, although the author gets a royalty for each edition. Below subsistence fees given to the translators make it impossible for them to survive. That is why they either translate sporadically or take up other jobs to multiply their income. They often take up multiple projects simultaneously, which affects the quality of the work, limits the literary invention and critical reflection of the translator. Moreover, the terms and conditions laid down by the publishing house curb all the independence of the translator. A translator is only hired for a project is she or he is willing to work according to the terms set by the publishing house. Often translators are pitted against each other in the competition for projects. The translators therefore enter into a race of meeting deadlines and grabbing the project first. Moreover, the publishing houses are only interested in titles that have the potential of making bestsellers. However, English as a language always enjoys hegemony in the world of translation. Works of authors seem to get recognition and awards only after being translated into English. This indicates the power dynamics that is at work and the asymmetrical relationship between languages. According to Vanity, these translation patterns point to a trade imbalance with serious cultural ramifications. British and American publishers travel every year to international markets like the American Booksellers Convention and the Frankfurt Book Fair, where they sell translation rights for many English language books, including the global bestsellers, but rarely buy the rights to publish English language translations of foreign books. This imbalance in trade has not only boosted the economic hegemony of America and United Kingdom, but has also increased English book import in foreign countries, thereby imposing Anglo-American culture in these parts of the world and making them permanent consumers. But this requires a fluency in translation that can only be achieved through domestication. Thus, the translator's invisibility becomes important for creating the illusion of fluency, masking the domestication and rewriting the text in transparent prevailing discourse. Vanity writes, behind the translator's invisibility is a trade imbalance that underwrites this domination, but also decreases the cultural capital of foreign values in English by limiting the number of foreign texts translated and submitting them to domesticating revision. The translator's invisibility is symptomatic of a complacency in Anglo-American relations with cultural others, a complacency that can be described without too much exaggeration as imperialistic abroad and xenophobic at home. The translators in India are also considered secondary to the author, although Sahitya Academy has recognized the task of the translators and awarded the best translator every year. Some other institutions have also followed suit. This has somewhat encouraged the zeal of translation among both professional and freelance translators. But the translations done in India is most from regional languages into English rather than from one regional language to another. The hegemony of English as a language still dominates the scenario, and because of the status that English enjoys, the number of regional language publishing houses that publish translation is far less than those publishing English translations. Now, let us talk about what makes a translator visible. When the translation is bad, full of errors, unnatural in style, so all this so-called discrepancy in translated text makes a translator very much visible. We can understand that this is a translated text because the prose, what I am reading in this story, is not that natural what can be found in original text. Second thing is, if the source text contains mistakes, the translator's subjectivity becomes visible while dealing with the mistakes. The translator has to either speak to the author by correcting the error or to the reader by providing a translator's note or a seek thereby drawing attention to the error. Next point is when the reader knows that the source text was obviously written in another language and therefore the version they are reading has to be a translation. When the translator consciously decides to come out of the hiding and make her or his presence felt by appending a translator's note to explain the choice of the text she or he has made for translation, the methods she or he has used in translating the text. The translator may even translate resistantly by using unusual form of source language grammar and style, mix registers, or use certain words from the original text that stand out and make the readers aware that the text they are reading is a translated text. This is known as foreignizing, or the method advocated by Schleiermacher. This strategy this strategy can be seen as counter strategy to domestication, which would carry the peculiarities of the foreign text into the translation, thereby never letting the reader forget that she or he is, after all, reading a translated work. The reading will not be smooth and therefore does not agree with the profit motives of the publishing industry. A translator becomes visible when a text is dealt by a translator scholar who, by choosing a text that is culturally and historically remote, adds details, commentaries, introductions, footnotes to get the message of the source text carried across the target readers. Now let us conclude the discussion. Modern translation studies have worked towards bringing the translator back into discussion and making him visible. Translation studies have redefined the scope of the word translator. A translator is no more regarded as a mere carrier of text from one language to another, neither in his or her work denigrated as less important. Translation studies scholars have contributed a lot towards giving its due importance to the figure of the translator. Historical studies concentrating on the history of translation and interpretation have spoken about the translator and his role, and has looked at the achievements of individual translators and interpreters through history, as an Andre Lefebvre's book Translation, History, Culture, a source book in 1992, and Delise Woodsworth's Translators Through History 1995. Feminist scholars have spoken about and brought to the forefront the long-lost women translator, like in Louise Swan Flotow's book Translation and Gender, translating the era of feminism in 1997. Numerous works in cultural studies have shown the influence of translators and their translations on cultural development and cultural identity. Books like that of Susan Bassnett and the Peter Bush's The Translator as Writer, Vasil Hatim and Ian Masson's The Translator as Communicator, and Pilal's Transcreation has reflected on the creativity, subjectivity, and the aesthetic involvement of a translator in the making of a translated text, which is an original in its own right. There are even polemical works like that of Lawrence Venuti, The Translator's Invisibility, that talks about the translator's legal position and copyright issues. What we learned from this whole discussion about translator's invisibility, that we came to know that lots of issues, the governmentality, the politics of different government policies, the policies and politics of publication houses, general notion of readers about the translated text, market economy, all these things are involved to decide the role of the translator and to make an impression of status of the translator in particular culture. And all these issues make a translator invisible in a certain reading culture. If we see the translated text in different Indian regional languages, we can find that so many big publication houses are there who put translators' names in very small fonts, either in very small fonts, or they put translator's name inside the cover page. As translator is not important, translator is actually the second class citizen in preparing or in bringing a book from one culture to another. So the translator's invisibility is very much seen, very much common in our culture. All these things are discussed with theoretical analysis. All these things are discussed in this module. And this is a request to the listeners, to the students or new learners, that you can elaborate this discussion furthermore from your own experience of reading translations and from your own observations of translated text published from different regional publication houses in India, and you can find the reasons why translator is invisible or why translator is visible in some particular cases, and how translator is visible and how translator is invisible in certain literary, cultural and linguistic system. Thank you.